Um, okay, I believe you can see my screen. So we're doing example 1 on page 553. So let us go through it. And the example was dealing with an indicator review to assess whether there are any indications of impairment or not. All right. So we had to look at various points to determine whether there is an impairment or not. All right. So the first thing that we looked at is the net asset value. Okay. So we say that the net asset value, by looking at the solution, the net asset value presented in the statement of financial position is 300,000, which was your assets of 400 minus your liabilities of 100,000. This equates to a net asset value of $3 per share. However, the fact that the market perceives the value of Ilgai to be only 2.2 per share, or 220,000 in total, suggests that the total assets in the statement of financial position may be overvalued. This difference in value appears to be material and suggests that there may be an impairment. So we looked at that part. We looked at the future cash flows. The future cash flows from the specific asset, the plant, will be reduced over the next year, which suggests a possible impairment, but the fact that it's expected to be slight suggests that the impairment would be immaterial, and therefore this fact alone does not require the recoverable amount to be calculated. All right. And then, so let us look at the next bullet where we're looking at the present value of cash flows. It gives us a present value of cash flows to be expected at 230,000. The present value of cash flows is expected to be 230,000. Okay. So let's look at the present value of future cash flows from the use of the plant is 230,000. This appears to be significantly less than the carrying amount of the plant of 350,000. The difference appears to be material and therefore suggests that there may be an impairment. Okay, so bullet 1 and bullet 3 indicate that there could be a possible impairment. However, for bullet 2, since the future cash flows were expected to be, there was expected to be a slight changes, that indicated that there might not be an impairment. All right. But now, before we can actually assess whether it's actually true that those impairment indicators indicate that there is an impairment, we have to actually reassess the variables of depreciation. And the variables of depreciation are things like the useful life, the depreciation method. All right. So let us just read bullet 4. On the balance, there appears to be overwhelming evidence that suggests that there may be a possible impairment. And if, as in this case, the possible impairment appears likely to be material, the recoverable amount calculated. By doing this, though, one must first reassess the variables of depreciation and adjust the carrying amount for any changes in the estimate. Okay, so what is the reason for adjusting, for reassessing the variables of depreciation? Can anyone tell me what is the reason for reassessing the variables of depreciation? Anyone? So we have to reassess the variables of depreciation because it might have been that our original estimates were incorrect. All right. So in order to make sure that the estimates were valid, we reassess those variables of depreciation so that we can adjust our carrying amount. So that we can adjust our carrying amount. And then the new carrying amount that we obtain, we will now compare that new the various to the information that we have obtained in the indicator review to actually see is there any possible impairment, and if there is a possible impairment, then we would have to calculate the recoverable amount. So let me go back to the question just so that we can. Are you there? Sorry, it seems there was a problem. Anyway, it is fine. So as I said, let us go back to the question and see. Um, I'm reading from this part that I'm highlighting. Little Guy Limited performed an indicator review at its financial year end 31 December 20XX to assess whether this might be impaired. Initial information collected for the purpose of the review indicates that the budget net cash flows, these are slightly reduced because of a decrease in market demand for the plant's output is expected during 20X9, after which it has been determined that due to intensive usage in the plant's early years, there is limited use beyond 20X9. So here, this is very important to us that it's saying that the machine might actually not be used beyond 20X9. So it means that the useful life of the machine is affected. So we first have to go and see what was the useful life of this machine. So let us read from the beginning. It tells us little guy owns a plant. Okay, so I said machine, but it's a plant. Little Guy Limited owns a plant, its largest non-current asset, which originally cost 700,000 on 1st of January 20X4. So we know that the date of purchase of this plant was 1st of January 20X4. We are in 20X8 now. It has a carrying amount of 350,000 31 December 20X8 and it's depreciated to a nil residual value over a 10-year estimated useful life. So we know that this machine had a 10-year estimated useful life. Okay. So now let us go and look at it. This bullet here tells us that there is expected to be limited use beyond 20X9. So how many years in total would this plant be used for if it is used up to 20X9? Can anyone tell me? How many years would the plant be used for if it is used until the end of 20X9? How many years would it have been used
5, sir.
for? Go ahead.
5.
Is it 5 years? So we have to count 20X4 is 1 year, 20X5 is another year, 20X6 is another year, 20X7, that's the 4th year, 20X8 is the 5th year, and 20X9 is 6 years. So this plant would actually only estimated useful life was 10 years. So we have to now recalculate our depreciation. We have to recalculate our depreciation. So let us look at this. Okay, so let us look at this to find here here there's some workings in order to show you the remaining estimated useful life. So remember, we are at 31 December 20x8. So as at 31 December 20x8, we only have 1 year remaining, okay? Because it tells us, the scenario tells us that at 20x9, there will be no further um, use for that asset. All right. So if we calculate the total useful life was given as 10 years, that was given. So up to 31 December 20x8, there would be 5 years, right? There would be 5 years that would have been used up. And if 5 years were used up, it means that there will be 5 years remaining. However, um, based on the original estimate. However, we know that the information tells us that after 20x9, there will be limited use. All right. There would be limited use of that asset after 31 December 20x9. So 20 from 20x8 to 20x9, it's only 1 year is 1 year's use that's remaining. Okay, so if you take the 5 years remaining useful life that would have been there according to the original estimate minus 1 year, it means that actually our useful life has actually decreased, right, by 4 years. Otherwise, you could have just said 10 years minus 6 years, then we would have um, arrived at the 4 year reduction in the useful life. Okay, so this working, you do not have to do the working like this, as long as you can easily do the working in order for you to estimate the useful life remaining. It doesn't really matter how you arrive at that. All right, so the important thing is to calculate the depreciation. So let us go and look at the depreciation. In the question, it tells us, let's go to the question itself. It tells us that on 31 December 20x8, there's actually the asset has a $350,000 carrying amount. That's the carrying amount at 31 December 20x8. But then if that carrying amount is at 31 December 20x8, what would have been the depreciation for that current year? What would have been the depreciation for 20x8? All right. So in this question, they actually do a calculation. They actually do a calculation for you. So let us look at it. At 31 December 20x8, what did we say the remaining useful life is supposed to be according to the original estimate? Class, are you with me? Seems there's something in the chat. So yes, that is actually correct, that there would have been 5 years remaining useful life as after 31 December 20x8. So if we were actually at the beginning on 1st of January 20x8, how many years would they have been remaining? It would have been the 5 years at the end of 20x8 plus the 1 year for 20x8 itself. So on 1st of January 20x8, there would have actually been 6 years, right? The remaining useful life of that asset would have been 6 years. You wouldn't have had to calculate the depreciate this asset is being depreciated over its useful life. To get the depreciation for 20x8, either you can calculate the carrying amount the beginning of 20x8 divided by the remaining useful life, or you could have just said 700,000 divided by 10 years. You would get a depreciation of 70,000. 70,000. All right, you'd get depreciation of 70,000. And then if you added the 350,000 that you were given, the carrying amount at the end of 20x8 plus the 70,000, you would arrive at a carrying amount at the beginning of 20x8 of 420,000. So when you are learning something like this, the important thing is just to understand the principle and not look at it like, why did they do it in this way in the book, or why is the answer presented in this way? I've seen a lot of you, when you go through questions, you're saying, you always ask that question, why is it presented in this way? There are many ways you can get to an answer. All right. So as long as you arrive at the correct answer, it doesn't matter your calculations. So for instance, 5 is 10. All right. So for me, the important thing that you arrive at 10. It doesn't matter what method you used to arrive at 10. You just have to understand the principle and why we used it in that way. Okay. Are we together? Okay. I think I assume that silence means yes. All right. So now let us look at this. If we arrive, if we have a carrying amount of first 820,000, and we're now assessing it based on the original or on the reassessed useful life, which is years, how many years do we have remaining? We said at the end of 31 December 20x8, we're only going to use it for one more year, which is the 20x9 year, right? So we're going to use it at the 20x9. However, from the beginning of 20x8, we would have had actually 2 years, because we would have had the whole of 20x8 and then we would have had 20x9. So this asset, when we're calculating the depreciation for 20x8, we'll take the carrying amount of 420,000, divided it by 2 years, which is the remaining useful life at the beginning of, on 1st of January 20x8, we would get a depreciation amount of 210,000, and the carrying amount of the asset would be 210,000. Now, in this instance, this is where you calculate, you compare the two carrying amounts. Originally, in the original estimate, we have a carrying amount of 350,000, right? Our revert is 210,000. So it means our carrying amount has dropped by 140,000. All right. So since the carrying amount of the asset, the plant, is less, how does that affect our assessment of whether this asset is impaired? We will now have to calculate the net asset value. All right. We'd have to calculate the value of the net assets using the new estimate. Okay. So let us look at what the information gave us. Sorry. What happened to this? Class, you're so quiet. I just want to go back to the question. I lost the page. Okay, this is the page that we're dealing with. Sorry. Yeah, this is the page that we're dealing with. I think there's something in the chat. Where does the two, someone asked a question, where does two come from? Where does two come from? Okay, so this is what I was explaining when we're looking at this two. So let us go and look at the original question. It's tough. Okay, so that's a bit dark. I will unhighlight it. It says the budgeted net cash flows, these are slightly reduced because a decrease in the market demand for the plant's output is expected during 20X9, after which it has been determined that due to intensive usage in the plant's early years, there is to be limited use beyond 20X9. All right, there's limited use beyond 20X9. Now, at which year are we? What year are we actually looking at? We are looking at, we are in the 20X8, right, financial year. So we are in the 20X8 financial year. Let me show this to you. So if we were to calculate depreciation, we'd have to calculate the 20X8. We'd have to calculate depreciation for 20X9. So 20X8 is 1 year, 20X9 is another year. So in total, how many years will we calculate depreciation for? That is how we get 2 years. Are we okay there now? I think that answers your question. Okay. All right. So now let us look at this. We are saying that the plant has reduced. So let us look, this is the important bullet. A summary of the totals in the statement of financial position are as follows. Our assets are valued at 400,000 while our liabilities are 100,000. So this 400,000, this is before taking into account the new useful life, right? So now what happens here? Our assets per the statement of financial position before the change in useful life was 400,000. That was given to us. However, the carrying amount of the plant due to extra depreciation. And the reduction is the difference between the 350,000 carrying amount that we were given and the new carrying amount that we were given, which is 210,000. So the reduction of the assets, the asset actually reduces by 140,000. So we take our asset values, 400,000 minus 140,000. So the asset values after the change in useful life would have been 260,000. We subtract our liabilities to get a net asset value of 160,000. Now this net asset value, we now compare it against the market value. So remember in the theory, let me go back to the slides. One indicator of impairment, is if the net asset value per share is greater than the market value. So that is, sorry, the last bullet there that is highlighted in yellow, the net asset value per share is greater than the market value per share. So let us look what happens in. Here we have the total net asset value. It's not necessary for us to calculate the value per share, but anyway, our total net asset value is 160,000, right? And this is the revised net asset value is 160,000. But the market value of the share was 220,000. The company's market value. So something higher than the net asset value, it no longer suggests that the assets are impaired. It no longer suggests that the plant is impaired. So let me just read that bullet. The revised net asset value, let me just add the value. The revised net value of 160,000 is now less than the company's market value of 220,000. And therefore, the market value no longer suggests a possible impairment. The new reduced carrying amount is also more in line with the present value of the future cash flows per the budget. So our new plant's carrying amount is 210,000, while the present value of future cash flows is 230,000. That were given in the question where it told us. Let me go back to the question. The present value of the future cash flows is 230,000. So the present value of the cash flows is actually higher than the revised carrying amounts. All right. So that is also suggests that there is no impairment. That also suggests that there is no impairment. So let me just read that. As the carrying amount is now less than the present value of the expected future cash flows, the budgeted future cash flows no longer suggest an impairment. So what is the conclusion? Although the review initially suggested that there were possible impairments and that these were possible, resulted in the carrying amount being reduced. All right, so we reduced the new carrying amount because of the revised depreciation. So you would have had to pass a journal entry to account for the revised depreciation. This was quite long, but the reason that not the question wasn't long, but the answer was long because what was happening is that you were going through these steps. You were going through these steps to find out if there's a possible indicator. So you're looking at the steps one by one to find out if there is a possible impairment. All right. So the question goes into so much detail, right? It goes into so much detail because it's analyzing each and every point. All right. So you should go again through this question, right? Just so that you have a good understanding on why each and every step was done in order to arrive at the conclusion as to whether the recoverable amount should be calculated. If you look at the next question, example 2, it is exact, but some figures are changed. And because some figures are changed, the conclusion in 2 is that the recoverable amount needs to be calculated, all right, because of the factors that were there. Okay, so I want you to go through question 1 again, and then go through question 2. All right, question 2 is the same scenario, just some figures were changed, and in question 2, the solution actually is that the asset is possibly impaired, and that the recoverable amount needs to be calculated. All right.